Hello and welcome to the Wise Why. I'm joined this morning with Steve Rush, who I absolutely, genuinely adore. I have the pleasure of watching him coach my daughter last year, and wow, I mean, my little one is only, well, at the time she was only nearly 5 because she was just turning 5, and my goodness, he empowered her to believe in herself and to pick up that cricket ball and throw it. And I can remember watching her going, oh my goodness. And that was Steve. So as we all know, the Wise Why is not about me. It is about my guests. So enough about me and on to Steve. Please tell yourself to my audience.
Thanks, Kirsty. I'm Steve Rush. So I have a number of different labels. I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I'm a cricket coach, as Kirsty's just alluded to. I'm a podcaster of the Leadership Hacker podcast. I'm a writer. Just a crazy guy who likes to help people move forward. That's kind of how I would describe myself.
So, Steve, you've had this an incredible, varied career. I mean, I met you genuinely, the first time I properly spoke to you was in our neighbour's house at a party. And I was like, oh, right, you're Steve Rush. I've heard a lot about you. So I'd heard an awful lot about you. And you were kind of like this kind of, I don't know, what's the word I want to use? Hero of the village, one of the heroes. So, yeah, can you tell us or explain some of the stuff that you've done? Because your career is incredible, because you're not just a financial guy, you're not just a coach, you have a book out there, The Leadership Cake, you have a podcast that I just adore, and honestly, your podcast has inspired me on many occasions, and I use some of your guests' words actually in some of my coaching now, so I absolutely adore that. So please tell people about your journey.
Yeah, so I guess my backstory started man and boy in banking, financial services. I started out as a financial advisor, then became a sales manager, area manager for that sales team, that financial services team at 25. I was the youngest ever area manager that they'd appointed. So that was my first step into management and leadership. I then rose through the ranks, I suppose you would call it, across a number of different organizations, where I was leading then the bank insurance business. That's the wealth business for a global bank. And then at the end of 2010, I took a natural opportunity to negotiate an exit from that business. I just got to the stage where I got a bit bored of the cyclical nature of the financial services world. And then took a little bit of sabbatical, a bit of time out to find out a little bit about what I wanted to do. Ended up coaching, ended up consulting by accident. And that led into setting up a business, which I then led for 10 years, called Improve Consulting. And had a blast coaching, supporting, and helping businesses all over the world transform their businesses and their leadership teams. As part of that journey, I also wrote a book called Leadership Cake, which was available and still is in about 40 countries. And that was brilliant. It just really kind of transformed the conversations that I was having to help people really rethink and reframe. And Leadership Cake is just a metaphor for you as being a leader and thinking about getting the right ingredients. And, do you taste right as a leader? And have you got the right brand? That's the icing on the cake. And then fast forward to where we are now. I was working with a fantastic organization as a consultant called MSCI. And as part of that last assignment, I had an absolute ball working with them. A great organization, great culture, great opportunity to develop the organization. And in parallel, we had a conversation at the back end of last year, and I am now a full-time employee of MSCI. I'm an executive director, and I lead the talent management effectiveness function there across the globe. It's 5,000 employees. And never look back. I'm really, really excited about what the future may hold for me.
That's incredible. What made you decide to join? And let's see if I can get it right. MCSI?
MSCI.
Spot a dyslexic. So I always switch things around, and people don't realize just exactly how the dyslexic brain works, which I want to come on to in a minute, actually, with your experience, what we were just saying before we came live. But what and how did you decide to switch? Because I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, so started out as an assignment, helping them with their learning and development functions, helping them raise awareness of some of their key product, services, and solutions. And very quickly, actually, when I was part of that organization, it felt good to be part of that community. And being the hired help as a consultant for 10 or 11 years, you dash into an organization, you depart some knowledge, you provide some teaching, coaching, and support. You then leave with having made an impact and then leading on the progress of the work that you've done. And that was always been the case for me. But something clicked with me when I started work for MSCI. There was a real community and a real focus, a real passion and drive actually across the whole organization to want to do things differently, to really make a difference. And it was one of those moments where you start to question around, well, actually, why was I doing what I was doing in the past? Well, for all the reasons that I'm doing now is exactly that. So helping people move forward, be innovative, find new ways of working, explore real blockers and challenges for people and help them unlock them. And I come to the conclusion I don't need to be a consultant in other organizations to do that if the opportunity presents itself in one organization who's still got loads of ambition. And therefore, when the conversation happened, it was a bit of a no-brainer for me.
So I remember because I was just testing out my new mindset when I met you in August properly face to face, and I was just testing out my new mindset. And I remember at that point talking to you about the power of the positive word, and my beautiful husband just stood next to us, and I explained what I was doing, and he said, "Oh, I'm just this," and I went, "No, you're not. You're not just." And it's one of those big hatreds of mine is how we devalue ourselves so quickly. And it's one of the things we were talking about beforehand about understanding your value. And it's lovely to hear that you can feel that satisfaction in your new role. It's just brilliant.
Yeah, exactly. And, we are great at self-sabotaging what we do through our own words, our own self-talk, our dialogue. I often use the phraseology that the words and the voices that we wake up to in the morning are the ones that need to serve us well all day. And they're the last words you're going to hear when you die. So they need to serve you well, but they often, that self-talk is when we just put in words should and just and if only. They're really unhelpful. That's a really unhelpful dialogue for us.
They are. So I'm going to touch on the subject that you asked me, because I've called this platform the Wise Why for a reason. And I know why I've used it, because it, as you were just saying, it's not a word we should use. And I'm going to put it out there. We should not use the word why. If we're selling, we never say, why do you want that? Because immediately you put someone's heckles and their back up. So I deliberately called this the Wise Why, because so many people were saying and shouting on social media, no, you're why. And it kind of started to annoy me, to be honest. So now everybody can now find out why I called this platform the Wise Why. Why don't you like the word why, like me?
This is great, and I'm delighted because it's a bit of an oxymoron, and I think you've been quite cheeky calling it the Wise Why. And the reason I don't like the word why is because it actually doesn't help us with that same self-talk. So if you think about the whole notion of why, so why is an emotive word, and it seeks for emotions, it seeks for reasoning, but it actually doesn't find reasoning, it finds emotions. And the reason that happens is when we ask why, and if you think about the journey that we've been on when we've started asking why, it starts out when we're kids, right? So we start asking our parents and our neighbors and our family and our associates, why does that happen? And if you've ever been around small people that are growing up, the biggest thing they ask is why, because they don't understand any different. And eventually what do we do in return is we say, oh, just because. It's this, just because. It doesn't give us actual data. It doesn't give us anything that's specific. And the reason that happens is that it goes to the back of our brain, the limbic system. It goes to the part that's really unhelpful, and it gets loads of emotions. And if it's a good emotion, great. Often, however, when we seek why, it finds and scans loads of unhelpful emotions. So I always, in my coaching world and in my business world and in my friends, and in fact, my kids will even tell you this, that we've eradicated the word why, and we now ask, what's the reason? And the reason we do that is because it goes to the prefrontal cortex, the logical part of our brain, the executive part of our brain, and it gives us data. So that's a long answer to a very simple.
Someone said to me recently, your daughter doesn't ask why, and I went, no, because we don't. And it's exactly the same thing. We've never gone through that why. I'm probably going to really regret saying this, but we've never gone through that, because she will ask a question and I will give her the data that she needs to understand. And we were doing it when she was really, really small. People looked at me and went, why are you doing that? And I went, so that she doesn't ask why, because if she's got the information. Now, I was lucky. I went on a parenting course, and that parenting course explained what we should do to avoid why. So I use choices and consequences. I use I statements. I use lots of different things within our structure of our family, but also in the coaching. So yes, you are right. I was being deliberately cheeky. I was deliberately taking the mickey. I nearly ended up with the why, because I just thought, you know what, I really am. And I've been waiting for a guest to actually turn that around to me and go, why did you call it? Because we all know, as coaches, as mentors, that is the word you don't ask. In sales, you don't ask it. So thank you for putting it into the words that I can't use. So I really appreciate that. Serious question. Did you have any, because you've changed so much and you've evolved so much. And as I said, I love watching you empower children. And you, interestingly enough, I met your son before I met you, because my daughter idolizes, absolutely idolizes. I drove past him the other day and she was like, and I went, yes. So did you have any, or how many aha moments? There must be loads. Tell me about some of your aha moments along the way.
Yeah, and I probably had too many to notice, and I think that's a really good thing, by the way. If you're having regular aha moments, that means that you're constantly looking and curious to find new ways of working, new ways of doing, new ways of thinking. There have been a number. The biggest thing for me is when I started moving into the world of consultancy from business, having to then get people to think more strategically. I did have a massive aha moment, and I can thank a chap called Clem Bezold for this. So Clem Bezold, back in the early mid-70s, actually started thinking about why we think the way that we do and how does that prohibit our ability to think strategically. And he created what they call the futures cone. And what's great about this, and I teach and taught this as part of my strategic thinking exercises in the past, is that if you stand around a flip chart in business or in a class with anybody and you say, right, let's think about the art of the possible, what you find is that you get the art, if you're lucky, of the plausible, which is not the possible. So possible means anything is absolutely relevant and can happen. Plausible means you need evidence to suggest it. So already when that starts to happen, you pull people back with some limiting beliefs and some unhelpful mindsets. What you usually get, however, is the art of the probable, which means we have relatively small timescales, so 12 months, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, but we can see ahead. So the plausible becomes more probable. And then we wrap loads of belief systems around it to make it real, so we can actually think that we can achieve these things. So rather than going in the flow and in the spirit of innovation and thinking crazy thoughts and crazy ideas, we actually limit our beliefs. And it was massive for me, because at the time when I starting to think about my own business and writing books and doing things like that, I was having some really unhelpful thinking that comes along with that. So I'll never be an author. You know, I'm dyslexic. I'm never going to be able to do this. I'm not going to be able to stand on a stage in front of 1,000 people and speak about my book. All unhelpful things, because I was thinking about the art of the plausible, or most probably the probability of how I was behaving then, rather than what could be possible. And that whole mindset shift for me was a massive aha moment, and one where I still use on a regular basis to check and balance not only how I'm thinking and working, but how my teammates and my colleagues and past clients are as well.
And I love that. And I can honestly say it was either 2004 or 2005, I took the biggest leap of my life and I jumped into my rabbit hole and I decided to embrace the art of the possible and I just decided that every time some crazy thought came in, I was going to explore it. And I remember making the decision that there was a surfboard. This is how I approached it. And this was not with coaching. This was about pulling myself out of a really deep, dark place. And I decided to imagine a surfboard, which I can't surf, but a surfboard on a beach with fantastic sunshine. And I was going to hop on it and I was going to stand on this thing and I was going to stand up, upright and proud. And no, in fact, upright, I don't like the word proud. And I was going to stand on this thing and just see where it landed. And I adopted this mindset, as I said, way back in 2004, 2005, just because I wanted to change my entire life. And since jumping onto that surfboard, my goodness, I still don't know where I'm going to land. I've got ideas of where I want to go, but I really still maintain sitting on my surfboard and seeing. And when I come into land at the beach, it's great. And then I get back on it again. And that's how opening doors happen, because I wanted something that would be suitable for me to I can't say no, get her to school, get her home. And I wanted all of these things, but I couldn't do it if I didn't jump back on my surfboard. So I love that. Yeah. I really do.
And one thing that holds people back is because they want to feel an ability to be able to deliver something and achieve something. And that desire to execute, deliver, is actually prohibiting people think about what they could do. unlock future possibilities and start scenario planning and thinking about other things that they haven't yet thought about, that doesn't even need to exist or be real even. You look at Elon Musk as an example, and some of the early innovators in technology, Steve Jobs. These guys were thought to be absolute crackpots when they started out, because nobody had the evidence and the data to suggest that what they were suggesting that they could do could be done. That's the difference between possibility, plausibility, and probability.
I love it. I really, really do. Tell us about because the Leadership Hacker, as I said earlier, I love your podcast, and I've recommended it to a lot of people. And what I find about it is it's really inspiring, but it gives you some really good practical advice. I love the way that your podcast has the news section at the beginning, and I love your style as well. I love the way that you present it. It's very relaxed. It's very informal, and I'd love people to know what I'm going to try not to say that word. What made you set up?
Yes, it was an interesting moment actually. So the beginning of March 2020, so right at the beginning of our lockdown, was when our first episode went out. And from that first episode to the idea that was born probably about 6 weeks before was all it took to get us up and running. And that idea came about because I just got a bit bored, actually, if I'm honest. And I'm thinking about what else could I do that could help other people move forward with their life and work. So I thought I'd write another book. That's what I'll do. I've got loads of transcripts and manuscripts, and I could just plug it into another book. Selfishly, didn't have the energy or the appetite to want to do that right now at that time. But what I did want to do is genuinely just share stories and insights and help people think differently about how they were working and how they were leading their teams. And I'd listened to a few podcasts. I wasn't particularly enamored by what I was listening to, and I thought I could do that. And I reached out to 10 people that I knew that were independently great people, had great stories, great authors, experts in their own right. And I said, look, if I do this thing called a podcast, would you come on it? And the first 10 people said yes. I've never had to ask anybody else since then, which is just so fantastic because it just took off right the way through lockdown. We now got over 22,000 listeners in over 100 countries, and every guest that comes on the show now just brings another level of diversity, and our guests are pretty much pan global now. So we're getting some really great people talking to us about their stories. And the notion behind leadership hacking is there is no hack to leadership, by the way. A bit like the wise why. But my job as the leadership hacker is to hack into their thinking, their minds, their stories, so that our listeners get to learn from them.
And that's exactly what I'm doing today. Let's be honest. Right. So I did this on a whim, and I've made no secret of it. Somebody wanted to go live that I knew and I cared about, and I thought, well, I think I meet the criteria. Had an extra glass of wine, clicked the button on LinkedIn, and here I am. And like you, I don't have to root around for guests. People really enjoy I know what it is. People like sharing a story, and one of the things that I coach on is storytelling. I talk about the importance of a story. We've sat here for the last almost 20 minutes and we've shared lots of stories. We've talked about cricket. We've talked about your book. We've talked about why you set up your podcast. We are sharing stories, which is the human condition. You go back to the Native American Indians, they had a storyteller. And the art of storytelling is so important. It's the first thing we do to our children is we tell them stories. We go for a coffee. I'm on a rant. I will shut up. But for me, I think the story is so important. How do you feel about that?
Oh, it's incredibly important. Before we could speak, we would tell stories through pictures, in caves, in early dwellings. And the reasons that happens is because it creates an emotional connection. And people make the emotional connection through stories. So it's an incredibly important part of any leader or manager's toolkit, or anybody for that matter, who wants to get a message across. And people relate to stories, they don't relate to data. But if you turn the data into a story, people relate to the reasons that things are happening as a result of the data. So I think it's incredibly important. In fact, of all of the people I've interviewed on my podcast, the one that's had the biggest hits last year was a lady who teaches TED Talks, or teaches TED speakers to tell stories. And it's just a perfect example around creating the right spine behind the story gets your message across.
Now, I've missed that one. I'm going to have to go back and listen to it because I catch up on your podcast when I'm driving, and I haven't been driving. The school run's not quite long enough, but I drove up to Birmingham and I got 2 of your episodes, and I can't explain how much I've got out of your podcast. Just when I was feeling, because there have been dark moments in a business and in your first year, and you're driving yourself, and you're driving and driving and driving, and you know you're doing everything you can to raise brand awareness. Sometimes you just feel a bit lonely, and I can tap into your podcast and I can feel that I'm not alone. And nice. I can feel that I've got what I'm doing, I'm supported, and that I can, where it's been really useful is where I could reflect on some bad management I've had over the years, or how I wouldn't want to do something. And I found it really insightful. And when I met you, you were like, oh yeah, I do this little podcast. It's not a little podcast. It's incredible. And it's massive and it's huge. And it's really, really insightful. So, you know, I asked you on here because I love your podcast. Then I got to meet you. Thank you. Sorry, we've had a few comments. I'm just going to have a quick look. We've from Steve. Oh, I can't do this without my glasses. Here we go. I've been waiting to show these off. New glasses, everybody. Yeah, really not quiet and shy. Steve Quinn says, good morning, guys. I love this. Rabina says, good morning, Kirsty and Steve. I'm traveling today, so the signal may drop out, but it does not watch. I'll watch the replay because people do watch the replay. And then we've got Annette saying, what is the podcast called? And it's called The Leadership Hacker.
Yeah, it's called The Leadership Hacker Podcast. You can get it wherever you get your podcast from. It's on every single platform I know of, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
So who inspired you? Who's inspired you along the way?
Gosh, I can honestly say I've not got, the archetype mentor. I've met many, many mentors, and I think I've been inspired by good leaders I've worked with. I've been equally inspired by bad leaders I've worked with. So I think it's just recognizing that throughout your career, you will be learning from everyone you work with. And even those people who really cheese you off and irritate you and annoy you, there's a reason that that's happening. So pay attention to it because it's a really good learning experience. My biggest learning experience from one individual who will naturally remain nameless, who I created a character in my book for because that individual had irritated me so much. I needed to tell the world how much that individual had irritated me. Who has been disguised, but if they read the book, they would know exactly who they are. Taught me so much about how not to lead people. It was the biggest and most significant leadership lesson of my life.
Wow. When we come off this live, can you drop a link into the chat about The Leadership Hacker and also your book? Because I looked at it the other day and went, I really need to read this book. I really do. So so the people who've inspired you, who's helped you? Now, I know you've got a massive support network at home, but who's helped you along the way?
Yeah, so it goes without saying, my wife Claire has been a fantastic support. My kids have been brilliant, by the way, because I can be a proper dad, you know. So I'm going to be doing this, I'm going to be doing this, I'm going to go in here, there, and everywhere, and they don't quite see the real end value in what I do. But notwithstanding that, they've been really, really helpful and supportive. I've had a great community of people around me, and I think from a business perspective, having a good association around you, and LinkedIn's a fantastic way, by the way, to grow that network and that community. And again, I'd love to say I've got this Yoda kind of figure in my life, but I haven't. You know, I think there are many Yodas for me.
I hear you, and I think it's important that you, as you said, you learn from what you don't like and you take with what you do like. And if I think back, because obviously I didn't come into business until, well, I was in business, but I was in business as a freelancer, and then I came into business and decided to buy a house. So it's a very different journey for me. But some of the people that have inspired me, they go back to my youth, my childhood. You know, the woman who inspired me the most will always be this lovely lady called Lorna McGrath, who taught me to speak. And, you know, people can't understand what it was like being 4.5 and only having consonants, but that is what my life was. And, you know, the speech therapist I didn't like, so I learned what I didn't like about speaking. And then this amazing lady taught me to speak, and I still use her practices today. It's incredible. It really is. This is where you get to turn the tails on me. Ooh. I love this bit. Yeah. You get to ask me a question.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you one of the questions I ask on my podcast.
Okay.
So if you get to bump into Kirsty at 21 and give her some advice, what would that advice be?
Don't get married. The first one, not the second one. The first one. Don't do it. Walk out that church. Literally, walk out that church. You stood at that church and you said, I don't want to do this. Go. That would be my advice.
One of my guests on the podcast last week, when I was looking for a bit of wise wisdom from them, and I said, well, what would your advice be? And their response was, don't colour your hair.
To be fair, I actually have to retract that, because actually getting married that first time makes me who I am. And
the lessons, aren't they?
Those lessons, I wouldn't do what I do. I wouldn't be who I am, and I wouldn't have the empathy, the wisdom, or the understanding without that first crazy 12 years. So I really must retract that. But yeah, I wouldn't actually say that to myself. I would probably say never stop learning, on a serious note. But on the gut reaction, that question, that emotional response is don't do that. So interesting what you were saying earlier about the brain and how we function, because that question taps directly into the emotion, doesn't it?
That's
really good question. Really good question. Steve, it's been an absolute pleasure. I think, people have loved it. I can't thank you enough. This has been an absolute joy. I'm going to enjoy meeting you down the pub, because that's one of the things we can do. So I'm really chuffed about that. And thank you so much. That's it for this morning.